Hello, everyone. Welcome to our March webinar. If you don't know me, my name is Justine Chappell, Communications and Marketing Manager for ZAPP. I'm joined today by Christina Villa, Director of Business at Westaff, and Marika Bergen, Program Manager of ZAPP. You probably know them more than you know me. They'll be helping me today to guide our discussion, which will be all about jurying and what it might mean to rethink the traditional jury. So just to give some background information, we at ZAPP are hoping to create some resources for events centered on best practices for conducting an equitable jury. And when we say equitable jury, we're referring to a lot of different things, but the basic concept is to give, each artist an opportunity, an equitable chance for being invited to the event. And then when we talk about equity, we're talking about many types of things. So equity in gender, equity in race, physical ability and health, access to resources, age, class, and so on. So keep all of those different types of equity in mind today. But back to the resources we hope to assemble. This really ties into Westaff's, our parent organization's, guiding principle of embracing the unique identities of all people. So this topic is important to us, not only as we think about the ways we can make ZAPP better, but also as we support you in your work and share what we've learned throughout the years to help you in your efforts and make the jury process more equitable for artists. Today will be the chance for us to hear from you. You're the ones conducting these juries and you have all the different types of experiences about what's being done in the past and what's being done now. So we're here to guide the discussion and hopefully help you think about different topics or different perspectives. But we are going to be using this discussion as sort of a temperature check on the field and just kind of gain some insight from you about the lessons you've learned to inform the resources that we're working to create. So before we get into it anymore, I just want to ask that you make sure your microphone is muted when you're not speaking to avoid any interruption. If you have any questions that don't fit into the topic being discussed, you can use the chat feature. And if you also want to let us know that you would like to speak, you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and we'll keep an eye out to make sure that everyone who wants to speak gets the chance to. So also just a note, we are recording this webinar and the discussion in order to share the recording for those who missed it. The recordings get posted on YouTube, so keep that in mind as you decide if you want to have your video on or off, or if you want to share certain things. If you're concerned about any privacy issues, we don't want to prevent you from speaking or sharing your thoughts, so please feel free to reach out to us if that's a concern of yours. All right, so I want to get into our discussion since we have a lot to talk about today, but here's just a quick preview of what we'll be focusing on. So we have three general subtopics: transparency and disclosing jury information, selecting jury members, and conducting blind juries. I'm setting aside about 15 minutes for each topic, and we'll begin each section with a poll question for you to answer in Zoom. So just look out for that on your computer. And then once we do a poll, we'll jump into an open discussion using some guiding questions that we've prepared. So we want to hear from everyone, so feel free to speak out during the open discussions, or we'll use the chat feature to share your thoughts as we go along, if that's more accessible to you. All right, everyone ready? Let's jump right into it. So the first topic we'll talk about today is transparency and disclosing jury information. So we have a poll for you that you'll see on your screen. How important do you think it is to disclose information about the jury ahead of time to potential applicants? I'm going to give us about 45 seconds to 60 seconds, and you can input your answers. So let me end this poll and I will share the results. Let's see what everyone says. We've got about 43% says somewhat important, 29% very important, 14% each for not important and do not know. So I'll just leave that up for a little bit while we jump into our kind of discussion question. This is where I invite you to just kind of chat about your experiences. So what kind of information about the jury do you disclose to potential applicants to promote transparency in the selection process? Feel free to unmute yourself and let us know.
I'll start. I think it's very important for the applicants to see how the jury is done, if it's a monitor, if it's projected, who the jurors are, the scoring system, the rounds. I think you should share how many people you're inviting, how many people are returning. I have found through my years of experience, the more I'm transparent, the less questions I have and the less challenged I am at the process. So that's my experience.
And I agree with Cindy. This is Pat Fosnot. I'm with the Gasparilla Festival of the Arts in Tampa, Florida. And I'm the Jury and Rules Committee Chair. And we think it's very important for our folks to know who is judging, what the process is. In fact, our co-chairs at the festival put together not only a packet of printed information, but also a webinar to explain the whole process, because we think that the artists, it equips them to understand what's going on, and they feel better understanding what to expect, I think.
I have a little bit different perspective as an artist and a show director now. As an artist, I've been on juries where the jury has been announced ahead of time, and I've actually been lobbied by artists, which is an uncomfortable thing. And I think for that reason, I don't like to disclose, and I don't for our jury disclose the jurors beforehand. Once we've completed the jury, I do list who the jurors are and talk about them and give information. And we're transparent about the process before we do it, but we don't name the jurors before we do the jurying.
Well, I need to qualify my response to that, David. We have a two-step process. We have a selection jury of 4 people that do the judging in the fall when our application period closes, so that they select who gets into the festival. And then we have an awards juror who actually comes to the festival and walks around and makes selections of the award winners.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with David. It's opening up a can of worms sometimes to let people know in advance who the jurors are. I have, however, let people know who the jurors are in advance when launching a new show in a new market, where the affiliations of the jurors seemed impressive and lent credibility to the show. Otherwise, I have never revealed who's on the jury. We do the process, we let them see the comments that the jurors make in evaluating their applications. But I think David's correct, it opens an avenue that you might not want to explore.
I have a question about, David, for you maybe specifically, but do you think that you being listed as a juror and having people contact you, do you think your status as an artist and people contacting you had anything to do with their comfort level and potentially reaching out?
It's possible, I suppose. I mean, I am fairly well known, either famously or infamously. But I think that's possible. And you know, when I say I was lobbied, it sometimes was pretty blatant and sometimes was just very subtle. But it was uncomfortable. And you know, I would have friends who would make comments about, you know, oh well, I'm sure you'll let me in, or you know, I'm sure you'll recognize my work. And yes, I'll recognize the work, but no, I'm not going to let you in because you're a friend. When I'm a juror, I put on the juror hat and I divorce myself from that. But still, it's an uncomfortable position to be in, to have people contact you. And in our jury for Art in the High Desert, which we just completed a week and a half ago, we did not announce it because all of our jurors, all 5 of our jurors, are working active artists. And I didn't want to put them into the position that I have found myself in.
I guess
Go ahead, Cindy, sorry.
I guess for me, it's as a show director, I'm contacted all the time and saying, well, you're going to let me in. And I'm like, no, I don't think I'm the jury. I'm not going to direct it. I mean, and that's part of professionalism and integrity and authenticity. So for me, it was, if I just think people should know everyone's going to jury. I mean, you get hit up all year long as a director. You're going to get hit up if you sit on a jury, if you don't. There's a point of knowing the integrity. And I'm hoping I'm working with professionals on the outside that are applying to the shows.
Well,
I agree with that. I mean, I think there's kind of a difference between being the administrator and being an artist. But yeah, as I'm rapidly finding out, being on the admin side, there's a lot of people that I'm suddenly their best friend who I didn't really know all that well before. That's kind of a weird thing, but yeah, I think it is a little bit different depending on which side you're on, if you're the artist juror or if you're the administrator. Just my idea.
David, are your applicants coming from all over the country, or are they more regional or local?
No, they are coming from all over the country, and we've in fact we'll be extending invitations to people up and down the East Coast and Midwest and all over. So it is really a wide audience, even though we are a fairly regional show. We are drawing people. And the reason we do that is because we're the weekend before Art and Pearl in Portland, and that's also a big draw. So artists across the country come for both of us.
Well, I've been involved with jury and rules for Gasparilla for years, even though I wasn't always the chair, but I don't remember any judges complaining about people contacting them at all. Maybe it's because we have 4 of them that do the initial evaluation. I don't know, but nobody's ever said anything about being contacted.
Yeah. I think it's part of the director's job to take the flack, but I don't think you should have the jurors should be submitted to that.
Right, I agree.
I've done it both ways. I've done it where the jurors are announced well in advance, with an occasion for the arts. And then with Rockville, we tend to announce it at the show when they're walking around and jurying the show. And frankly, I haven't gotten pushback for either way of doing it. Most of the artists, I think, as long as you are transparent that you do have outside individuals during the show, they seem to be like, okay. And they're relying on you as the director, who should have a little bit of standing, right, to make good decisions on their behalf as to who will be judging their work. And maybe that's a position that we are lucky enough to fall into, because I'm looking around at the people on this call, and these are all good shows. So, it's part of the deal of running a reputable show, is that you have reputable jurors.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, we've always, before the jury, usually send out a letter to all the applicants, and that will include who the jurors are, where they're from, their backgrounds, and at least none of the jurors have told us that people have reached out to them. I'm sure maybe here and there that's happened. But on our website and on ZAPP, we're very upfront about monitored projection, because I know artists apply differently if it's monitor or projection. And yeah, we just try to be very transparent about the different rounds, things like that.
I'm wondering, as well as we're, kind of talking about like jury members and disclosing that information about who's going to be jurying. And this kind of is not so much the second question we have, but is there anything else, like what other kinds of information may or may not be appropriate to share with the applicants ahead of time?
Well, I think we should disclose as much as possible. Aside, of course, in my opinion, the names of the jurors, but I think we need to be really clear on everything we can possibly be clear on. And we do explain that in our prospectus and elsewhere.
So there's there's a comment from Jan Raven in the chat that talks about how this year they didn't have their jurors confirmed until the end of the application period. And I do recognize that there is sometimes a tension between needing to publish your application to, you know, start your application cycle, but maybe not having all of the details of your jury prepared at that moment. And how can you still keep up with your timeline while also, you know, providing transparency to artists who will be looking at your application and considering whether to apply. So I recognize there's a tension, and I'm just curious to know from you all a little bit more about that timeline.
I'll talk. An occasion for the arts. I didn't have my last juror until last week. Applications close in April. That is not unusual for us, by the way. We send out a letter to everybody who's applied to the show, off to the jury. And off to the jury is probably kind of the same letter that a lot of people are getting, which are, these are the jurors that are looking at with the picture of their work, if they're working artists, or their credentials, you know, all of those good things. I'm not sure that many shows, when you have a 6-month lead-in, to have that information. I don't think that tension is going to be resolved personally. And again, it becomes back to the show reputation. Is your show reputable in the eyes of the artists? I think is more important than if you have the jurors listed on in your application process.
Is one way to build a reputable show to list your jurors?
Perhaps.
Sometimes
Yes, it
feels
is.
like a little chicken and egg, you know, like.
I don't agree.
It depends on the situation. I've done both. When it's a new show and it's a place where I'm not known or anything, I will list the jurors. If there's somebody that's impressive, if it's just, you know, people I've gathered from across the country that know things about shows and art, then maybe not so much. But in fact, the second year of a show of mine is coming up, and we're not emphasizing the members of the jury as much as we did last year.
This is Christine from Jazz Fest. Someone has already said this, but I'll just say that we do the same thing. We give as much information as we can. In fact, all of it really on our prospectus, except for the jurors' names. We don't agree with releasing the jurors' names. Now, after the event, if somebody calls me and asks me, after the jury process, particularly asks that question, I would answer it, but that would be a rare phone call. I might have received a phone call once like that.
And Carl Washington, also with Jazz Fest in Congo. We have the artists get to see the jurors on the field. So we have the jurors who actually came in often and did the jury. And we also have on-site jurors that come out and juror for the awards. So when the people are walking around with the pads and notepads and jury scoring pads, the artists get to see who actually scored their stuff. And that's on the back end, not on the front end.
Oh, sorry.
All right, sorry, we'll get closer next time.
Well, thank you for joining us. All right, well, you know, we have a few more minutes if we want to stay on this topic. I think the juror names and, you know, disclosing that ahead of time, you know, it kind of comes down to the preference of, you know, whether maybe what you've experienced in the past with communicating with artists. Have any of you heard feedback about that in particular, besides, you know, those reaching out about, you know, the jury specifically, but have you heard anything about, you know, if artists would actually really like to see that ahead of time, for maybe a different reason than, like, I guess, you know, wondering what their chances are?
Ours are on our website months before the deadline. So, you know, it's out there, and we have a photo and a bio of each of the 4 selection jurors, and they're almost always academics or museum professionals. We seldom have a working artist unless they also teach. We want the broadest background possible.
I started announcing the jurors way back in when I was with Uptown, so a bazillion years ago, because there was this, people thought the show was being curated or juried by the show director only. So that process of being more transparent, every time I've come and started to manage a new show, and I have done 6, there has been a thought that it has been an internal process with nobody from the outside. So that may be my reason why I announce it, because I've been in situations where there's needed to be a change. Just a few words to explain that process.
And our show is all volunteer. We don't have a show director. It's board of directors and committee.
Jack, can you hear us now?
It's about the same for me, but I can hear you. I know a couple other folks can't as well.
It's very muffled. It's not, I can't hear it.
Okay. So.
What about now?
That's better.
Okay.
One other question I have on this topic is, for those of you that don't disclose the information, do you replace that with any like information about why you don't disclose it, or do you just simply not, and you kind of let people assume that it's an internal process?
Honestly, the questions that I've been doing this for a very long time, and the questions that I have been asked by artists is for the jurors' comments, not who are the jurors or, you know, anything like that. They've always just asked about comments. That seems to be their main.
They want that feedback.
Yeah.
And if I may add, we use peer jurors. So the word of mouth get around that is not selected by the directors. Not by the directors, because I mean we have peer jurors, peer artists that actually juror the show, and so they may talk that they were a juror, and so that kind of helped take the pressure off us that we're the ones doing the selecting, because it's known that the peer artists and participants we switch out each year are the actual ones doing the jury.
Yeah,
we do much the same thing. We promote the fact that it is 5 working artists, it is 5 peer artists. We don't name them, as I've said, but we do make it really clear that it's 5 artists that are out there doing the shows and who know the business. So we're not trying to hide anything about the jurors other than their name. We try to be as transparent as possible, including all the other factors that go into our process. So yeah, that's what we do.
Great. Well, this is a great segue into our next topic, talking about actually, you know, selecting the jury members. So let's do another quick poll here. Go ahead and answer this question. How often do you choose jury members that represent the diversity, whether that's racial, gender, age, artistic discipline in this context, of the community in which the festival takes place?
That's a tough one.
Oh,
That's what you want?
that's what I would say. Meaning diversity, racial, gender.
See, for me, I feel like I could use to strive on it, you know.
Give it a few more seconds on this one.
Yours is
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close that and let me share those. So pretty split between always and sometimes, and a few never in there as well. So we can talk about these results and kind of like how you wanted to you know, why you chose the answer you did, if you want to share that with us. And so I kind of just opening up with some initial questions about, you know, ZAPP, you obviously set eligibility criteria for artists. And then, you know, when it comes to jury, do you have eligibility criteria when you're selecting jurors? Or maybe do you want to share a little bit about your process for how you choose the jurors that you choose?
Cheerio. What's up, man?
Oh,
We, oh, sorry, was JazzFest going?
no, that's all right.
Oh, sorry. We do 2 jurors who were award winners the prior year. And then depending on what their 2 mediums are, we try to balance out the remaining 3 jurors. So that way it's almost like we have representation of all the mediums ideally. And they could be artists themselves, or art professionals. And the past few years, we definitely have been being more purposeful about making sure we have a variety of gender and diverse jurors.
I would agree with that. This is Jazz Fest. This is Keena. Somebody asked about Keena.
It was me, Amy, with Cherry Creek. Hi, Keena.
It's good to see you.
So
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm a little constrained on one of my shows because 4 out of the 6 jurors are award winners from the prior year. The good thing is that we jury 2D and 3D. And so that there are 2 peer 2D jurors and 2 peer 3D jurors. And then the judges at the show are usually museum or gallery or teachers or what everybody else is using, professional art experts. But for instance, this year or 2 years ago, because we had to cancel an occasion last year for the hurricane, 3 of the 3D winners were ceramicists. So by medium, I'm a little, you know, and women, a lot of women last year. So normally the gender thing is very balanced, but the mediums tend to be balanced. But I had an odd year that year where the judges, the ceramics were just outstanding, and I understood exactly why they won. But so, you know, I am slightly more constrained on that as the rules of the show go, per se. As far as outside of gender and being able to the mediums, I would say that diversity is a bigger issue just for the particular location of that show and the artists that tend to come to that show. So I don't have the same issue in Rockville at all. It's a much more diverse area with a much more diverse group of artists and much more diverse jurors because I have a bigger pool to pick from. But I would say that a location does matter to some degree when we're talking about equity of diversity.
Someone has in the chat, they said that if they could add to the poll, it would be something that they strive for, but it's not always possible. And that may be how some other show directors on the call feel. And so I'm just curious, from your perspective, what would you say makes it not possible to have a diverse jury? And again, when we're talking about diversity, we are taking that to mean racial, ethnic, ability, gender, but, you know, calling out specifically the diversity you're talking about. Are you talking about racial and ethnic? Are you talking about gender? What makes it not possible beyond, you know, what you shared, Robin, about some constraints with the show rules?
Well, for me, that would be it. It would be, it's not gender because that can be evened out with, you know, the other, the professional artist, but it is when you're doing, so when 10 of your award winners are basically white, and even if your juror is not, the judge is not, am constrained then. I mean, by the rules of the show, we invite our past award winners to be peer jurors because there's no conflict of interest. They have obviously a pass to the next year.
So the,
And that's not, it doesn't always happen that way. It's just that 2021, it happened that way.
okay. And
So
totally, that makes sense. And I was just curious, so has there ever been a discussion to adapt the rules of the show to address this possible issue?
no, frankly, the board of directors has not indicated anything to that. I mean, I brought it up, but they're not pursuing it as will be a challenge.
So board of directors is another possible constraint here that one could run up against if they're, thinking long-term about equity and how to really diversify their show. That's absolutely a potential roadblock in some cases.
I think that they would, I think that to be fair to the board, I think that they like the idea of it. They just don't like making changes to what they consider a process that has worked for 55 years. So I think that some of that, you're right, board development is a key factor to making these changes, 100%.
I come at this in interesting position. This is been my first year. This is my first year of directing our show. So I've been tossed into this whole whirlpool of learning a lot of things. It's a very steep learning curve. I've been involved with Carla, our previous director and founder of the show, and I really know what's going on there. But we're in Central Oregon. It's a very white community. It's not diverse in our community. So in the past, with the relatively limited budgets that Carla has had in running the show, it's been really limited how diverse the jurors could be made. A couple of them could be flown in each year for the jury, but for the most part, it was sticking with what's available there. When I came into the show now, reconstituting everything after 3 years and building it from scratch and building a new board, which is all artists, our board has really mandated that it become a more diverse show and a more diverse jury. And because of the pandemic, oddly enough, I was able to do that because there now is a process of doing jury by Zoom. And that's what we did, entirely online and by Zoom. So I was able to have a juror in Florida and one in Missouri and one in Michigan and a couple of them in Oregon. And we did have a racially diverse jury and gender diverse jury as well. So that technological change really allowed me to do things that we couldn't have done before, we couldn't have afforded to do. So we're really working at it. It's often not all that easy to find experienced artists to be that diverse part of the jury, because honestly, you look around the show and there's a lot of white faces in the show. And you really want to find those diverse people who are able to do it, and they're often being used over and over and over again for various juries across the country. It's a little bit of a conundrum, but anyway, that's how I'm approaching it, because I'm taking advantage of the technology and able to open up my jury pool a lot more.
Leaving some space for anyone else that is maybe itching to say something.
this is Kina Jazz Fest. I would just state, just listening to everyone and knowing the caliber of the shows, the diversity is really an important aspect and something that we always consider important and strive for.
And what are some of the ways that you actively strive for that you make that an intentional thing or execute that vision?
Well, I ask people to recommend jurors of color, and so I do that. And also I have a system where I kind of test out jurors, but they don't know they're being tested as a juror. We do, the jurors who make the decision for the show each year, we have a different panel at every year. They come out to the show and do an on-site evaluation, but also invite, I call them tasters, but they do an on-site evaluation and as well. And they're people that I am looking to see how good they are as a juror, if they're passionate, and, you know, see what their take is on things. And that's how I try it that way as well. But I do that for everyone, not just in regards to diversity, but diversity is very important in it's always something to strive for.
It's like a secret shopper, it sounds like you have.
Yes. Don't tell anybody.
Great. I'm going to open up our other question that we have here, kind of just about like number of jurors. So, you know, how many jurors do you think you need to encourage a balanced, fair set of opinions?
I'll jump in. We had 5. I think it was a great number. We had, I was really happy with the diversity of our panel that we ended up with, and diversity of opinion was across the board. And it was interesting to me, the artists that were selected. It was also interesting to see the artists that weren't, some pretty top names in our business that were not selected, because there was, I don't know, there's that broad opinion in those 5 people, and I think it made a real difference. I think the more the merrier. Of course, it gets to a point where there's too many and it takes too long, but 5 worked well for us.
I've always liked 5 because it seems to balance. I have seen a terrible jury with 3, and 2 of the jurors ganged up on the other jury person. And that to me was so uncomfortable as the facilitator. So I prefer 5, something to balance, because 2 to 3 is a lot harder than, 2 to 1.
Can I ask a question? Cindy and David, how many artists do you have in your show?
In St. Louis, we have 180, and we get about 1,200 applicants. It used to be about 1,600, and of the 180, 155 are coming back. So it's a 1 in 10 chance, and it's a 3-day process. It's very, very long.
Oh.
It's very, very long. We do 3 rounds, long discussions. So very
I can
long.
attest to that. I've been on your jury. It is a long jury.
It's very, very long.
I wondered how you could do it with 5 judges, because that's the problem, is timing. And we have, like I said, we have the 4 selection jurors. They work remotely with the ZAPP file, and they rate each of the artists, and the ones that get the highest scores get into our show. But our show has 235 artists, and there's no way. I mean, we're in downtown Tampa in a city, and there's no way we could do 3 days, number one. Number two, we do have 4, which is better than 3. But they make the selection on who gets into the show, and then we have 1 judge to do the awards. And that takes, all day Saturday. Then we're a Saturday and Sunday show. So I'm just trying to figure out how you're able to manage, what you do with that many people.
So for St. Louis, there's 5 jurors. 2 of them are award winners. 1 is a buyer. And then the other 2 are either academic or an artist or a gallery owner. The rounds, so the first round is yes, no, maybe, and they have to have 5 no's to be thrown out of that round. That's very simple. It could be done on ZAPP. The second round is discussion, but it's still a yes, no, maybe, and you have to have 5 no's to be thrown out of the round. And then the third round is discussion. And it just comes back to being very, for that show, it's a very prestigious show to get into. They do well, so it's just a little bit a different process. It doesn't work for every show, but you have to do what works for you and the authenticity of your show and how your show works.
Yeah.
We have this year we've got 150 artists approximately in our show. That's actually an increase over what it's been in the past, but we did an initial round of clearing out the applications. Each juror on their own went through them on their own time for about a week ahead of our live Zoom jury. And that got rid of about a third of the applicants. And that left us with something around 400 or 450 to go through. We did it in one day. It was a long day, but there was a lot of discussion through the process, and we did it and whittled it down to the 150.
It's interesting to learn how others do it. That's one of the reasons I'm involved today, because I'm interested in seeing what everyone else is doing.
So we split our jury. Our 2D artists only jury 2D work, and our 3D jurors only jury 3D work. And it's working. I mean, I'm never unhappy with what has getting the top scores. The only time I step in is if I know that they are buy sell for sure. And then I just, and there are a few that we all can probably mention, but the jurors don't always know that. But for the most part, I would say that it's a lot less fatigue on the jurors to only be jurying mediums that they are comfortable with.
We get about 1,000 applications, but like I said, they do them remotely. They get the ZAPP file and do it that way, and they have 2 weeks. So,
I'm gonna move us along a little bit so we can have enough time for our last topic, but feel free to continue the conversation about your process as we jump into this next one. Our next topic is about blind juries. And so let me start a poll. This one actually has 2 questions for you to answer. So go ahead and take some time to answer these questions, and we'll come back with the results.
Yeah. Well, what's the second?
I realize I didn't read the questions out loud, but hopefully everyone, if you want me to, I'm happy to. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And let's take a look. So our first question was, how anonymous do you think your jury is? Looks like the majority, 83%, said somewhat anonymous. My jurors may recognize the work or have a way to identify the artist. 17% said not anonymous. And then we have our second question, what is your opinion of blind juries as a best practice for promoting equity in art fair and festival jurying? 42% of you said blind juries are an effective way to promote equity and should continue to be used. And 42% said blind juries have flaws that need to be addressed, but they are still a valuable practice. 17% said they do not know. We actually have some fun thing to share with you for this topic before we get into our discussion. And that is some stats from ZAPP. So this is showing, we have 2 pie charts on the screen here showing the percentage of events that on the left showing how many show or hide artist names, and then on the right showing or hiding artwork prices. These numbers here are from ZAPP of all time, so not just the past year, past 5 years. So it's showing, since ZAPP started, and these are, juries that have been completed or are in progress on the site itself. So taking a look here, you'll see that we have majority, 56% of events that have shown the artist names, and 59% that have shown the artwork prices. So that's just to give you some perspective there. And so I can always flip back to the slide if anyone wants to look at it. But here are some discussion questions. I'm just going to throw them up here for now, but let's start the conversation about, how often do you see artwork that you recognize and know who created it? And maybe if you want to share a little bit about, why you answered the poll the way you did.
I see it a lot because we get a lot of the same artists applying to our festival.
As an artist, when I'm a juror, it's really hard. I have to step back and say, okay, I'm a juror now. I have to ignore the fact that I know 75% of who these artists are and really look at the work and really judge the work. And that's hard. And I think it's true for any experienced artist to do, because you want those experienced artists who have the knowledge of art, but they're also the people that have been at a lot of shows all over the country and are going to recognize the work. So you need to find the balance of the jurors that have the integrity to just step back and say, okay, I'm doing this very independently, but also to use their knowledge of the artist. Sometimes the information about the artist is relevant in the discussion. Trying to think of an example, but it does come up occasionally. So it's a tough balance.
Well, and I think to David's point, like our jury, there's definitely 2 artists who are in the art show circuit. So of course they're going to recognize their peers, but then you try to balance it out. And that's why we have 5, because it's not just the voice of one person. 3 others who are maybe more local, or they might be national, but they're not they have backgrounds in artwork, but they're not in the show circuit. So that kind of helps to balance it out, where they are maybe not as familiar with the artist, but they can recognize quality and things like that. And then it was interesting, that first slide, because we try, but also being with trying to find diverse in the artists and the jury, but also diverse price range is something we encourage our jurors as well. And that's something they do near the final rounds look at too. And so it's just, that was interesting to see that some shows don't show the price points.
I do have a question. So Amy, you brought up something that made me think about. So let's say that, your show has 5 jurors. If 2 out of the 5 know a majority of the work being presented without needing to see the name, then that's a 40% of your panel already knows the artists who are applying. Does the group still feel that that's equitable when thinking about it in terms of numbers?
I think, and just also it's like they might know who they are, doesn't mean they're going to vote them in per se, it is funny, we just had a board meeting where we presented some statistics from the past couple of years, but it is almost like just the returning artists that we have from year to year, and that percentage breakdown is similar, and like repeat artists from the previous year and like the first time artists. So even with different jurors, those numbers are almost like a third returning, a third who've never done it before, and a third who've done it before, but not the previous year. But I would say we've just recently started asking our applicants more background on age, race, sex, things like that, and starting to kind of compare from year to year the percentage of applicants and how many get in with those different backgrounds. So, that's one way we're trying to be more diverse and equitable in our practice.
We don't use artists as judges, as I mentioned earlier, so that's not an issue. I'm kind of surprised to know that happens. I didn't even realize.
If I may, Jazz Fest Congo, we have a large amount of returning artists as well. They apply, they make the show, and then we use peer artists to jury the show, and most of them know the work. So we charge them with integrity and to make the best selection possible. And then I would tell them, what if you were on the other side and you wanted someone to judge your work equitable in terms of appropriate? So we tell them, yes, you may know the work, you may know some of the work, but be professional about it and use integrity and the best, not the people that you know. And it works when you charge them with that.
I appreciate you kind of bringing up that subject of kind of the guidance you give your jurors. I'm curious if anyone else gives their jurors or jury panel, you know, some instructional thing like that ahead of time. Do you provide anti-bias resources? Is there anything being done or thought about, you know, maybe jurors would, you know, like, you know, thinking about how they jury, and if you give any sort of guidance about, you know, upholding that with integrity or setting aside any bias that there might be.
We haven't. I think I've made the assumption that the level of juror that we have, the artists that we have who are on our jury panel, are professional enough to do that. Maybe I'm being a little naive, but I really think they are. An interesting thing that I found is that the jurors of color that we had on the panel, when we did have artists of color come up, they were oddly more critical and pickier on those artists of color than they were on those who were not. And I don't know what that explanation is. It kind of surprised me. I sat back, I wasn't involved in the discussion, but it kind of shocked me in a way to see what was going on there. And I have no idea why. I mean, you could probably go in and do a thesis on psychology of what that means. It was an interesting thing.
It's kind of like voting against your own self-interest.
Well, it kind of felt that way. I don't know what it was about.
David, how did they know? Did they know they were artists of color that they were looking at?
Yeah, there were 4 artists in particular who are very well known, who do a lot of shows. I mean, any artist who's been in a few shows across the country knows who these artists are. And of course, the jurors knew that. And yes, we try to get them to step back from using that knowledge, but because of the subject matter of the art, and because it was an artist of color, there is some criticism of, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. There was just some real critical looking at those artists. In the end, 3 of the 4 got into the show, but the comments that were being made were much sharper than I saw for other artists that they would also have recognized, that who were white artists.
Mm-hmm.
I can't explain it.
I'm just curious, you know, Justine, I know we only got a few minutes left, but I am curious if anyone wants to talk about any potential downsides of blind juries. I mean, based on the poll, it seems pretty, it seems like the group agrees that, you know, either blind juries are effective or they should still be used, but maybe address some flaws. What downsides might exist with the blind jury, if any?
And I would also like add to that question, like, what are the potential upsides of not having a blind jury? Like, what could you benefit from keeping it open?
Well, I like the idea of them just being juried solely on their artwork, and their name or reputation doesn't come into play. And also with us at the Jazz Fest, it doesn't matter if they've been juried in 15 times or 0 times in their history with the festival. So the blind jury is very important.
And so if you're thinking about, let's say, like if you say that it's important for your show to diversify racially and ethnically the pool of artists that you have, but you're limited in the ability to find racially diverse jurors. How would you address the problem of trying to diversify your show?
Well, you just listening to y'all, this is Keena Jazz Fest. It's making me, I do a charge every year, and the jurors very much appreciate the charge. And because, you know, they're anxious about the response. It's a big responsibility. But I'm thinking, from what I hear, is I think I'd like to add to my jury charge something about cultural or ethnic, because, you know, if a juror is seeing something that's a little bit different, even though it's really good, they might not consider it. And I think that as a manager, I need to point that out to them. So I think I'm going to add something new to my next jury in regard to that.
You touch on a topic that Robin and I had started having this conversation several months ago with her conference, but you know, the standards of what artistic excellence is can be subjective, and that can require some reframing about what that means in general too. So that's, we definitely don't have time to talk about that in today's session, but I would love to surface that conversation as well.
I think it's really difficult. We're trying to push two different things here, trying to push diversity onto the shows and also artistic excellence onto the shows. I'm not sure that those are entirely compatible in the current system. There may be a way of blending it somehow, whether that's with or without a blind jury, but it's, you know, I'm uncomfortable with the idea of selecting art because it is from an artist that would be considered part of the diverse community, as opposed to art that is better, that is this white guy living down the street. That's hard. I want the best work possible in my show, and I don't, you know, I do care about the diversity. I do want to find a solution, but my real concern is to have the best possible work for my patrons.
Well, of course, but I think, you know, in what I just said a bit ago is I think it's important for me to maybe point that out, that just because the work is different, like I saw, we had an applicant this past year, and the work was obviously African. And you don't see too much of that. I mean, it's not the majority of what's presented before you. And one of the jurors, and the work was really excellent in my mind. And one of the jurors didn't score it as it should have been, I felt. And this is a very good juror. So I asked after, I said, I can't believe that, you know, you gave that particular application a lower score. I just think they need to maybe be reminded of differences, that, you know, just, you're always going for the caliber of work, the best before you, but you still have to have an open mind.
I think two thoughts are in my head. One is sometimes the iconography indicates a certain ethnicity or background. But I will say, as far as our show this year, which was about 2 weeks ago, we had more artists of color and different ethnic groups, including several immigrant artists whose work was wonderful. And we were just so happy to see the diversity that is automatically coming into our show.
I want to raise also the point that I think different areas draw different artists, and that some of that is not the show can't do anything about attracting a more diverse artist if they don't feel that they're going to do well at that show. That's not every show, but I can tell you that my Rockville show is completely diverse. I have no issues whatsoever attracting all ethnicities and all genders.
Robin, what Rockville, what state is
Rockville,
it?
Maryland. So right
Oh.
outside DC.
Okay, thanks.
So that show, it's pretty diverse. I mean, you know, I think 23% of our artists are Black, 24% are Asian, about 10% are Hispanic. It matches our demographic of where we're at. I would say that other shows who don't have that demographic and don't feel that there is an immediate audience necessarily attracted to their work, I think that sometimes we're being tasked with something that may not naturally fit for all artists. Attracting
We're a melting pot community.
you are, and so am I.
And we're a tourist destination, so we get everything.
Right, and so am I. So all I'm saying is not every show is
right.
That's all I meant.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna step in here. I'm sorry to cut anyone off, or if you had anything else you were gonna say. I just want to thank you all so much for coming into this discussion and sharing your experiences with us. And, you know, I know that this is a conversation where we're kind of putting up topics and not necessarily doing much with it, but just hearing from each other. And I hope that some of you have learned from each other, and, you know, sharing those experiences helps in some way. Like I said, this is not going to be the only thing we do to kind of just have this knowledge sharing from ZAPP. So Christina, anything else you wanted to close with?
Again, thank you everyone for the discussion. Look forward to more opportunities for conversation or other resources that we're creating. I think, you know, it's apparent this is an ongoing conversation, and there's just lot of nuance and lots more to discuss. So thanks for taking the time and being open with us.
Thank you, Zap.
Have
Thank
a good
you.
rest of your week.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.